Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with David Frank. We are talking the news, national news of the day. It has not slowed down from last week. Obviously, the big news. Actually, debt ceiling has been punted for a couple of months anyway. We're also going to talk about the infrastructure and the reconciliation bills, which are still in the news. Mankin Cinema. Bernie Sanders, the squad, everybody in the news, protests. We'll talk about that, but it looks like, at least temporarily, the debt ceiling is sort of taken care of. The Republicans came in with a sort of offer. Democrats took them up on it. Everybody's arguing about who blinked. Dave, you want to tell us what happened?
Yes, the way I see it is the crisis management. What's the word? The reasonable voices in the room spoke up and said, "Look, we are 1 week away from where Treasury Secretary Yellen says we might hit a real crisis, a real problem here. You know, Wall Street's not happy." Financial markets around the world are not happy, but more importantly, you could look bad. People will start to look bad if things go awry. And what I think basically they did was McConnell, Senator McConnell, Republican leader, said, we will delay, we will agree not to filibuster an extension that you can pass on your own through the end of November, meaning the beginning of December. And then that way, this is McConnell's position, is that the Republicans would be giving the Democrats a chance to push through a specific number for the debt ceiling through budget reconciliation. Now, almost like in the Cuban Missile Crisis, the other side only heard half of what they wanted to hear and ignored the other half. And so the Democrats said, look, this is great. They came to their senses. Nobody wants this to happen. We will get this done. But they did not, Schumer did not comment on the budget reconciliation part favorably, in a sense, like it's a half a loaf delay. So everybody wins that there's no crisis, but it's still to be determined how they're actually going to, take ownership of the amendment and the change. And it all comes down to, not to make oversimplification, it could be you do away with this archaic practice that nobody even needs anyway. It could be that you just extend it, 2 years, 4 years, no dollar amount. But the Republicans think it's a political win to force the Democrats to agree to a specific number through budget reconciliation process.
It's so esoteric. I said this last week. Nobody cares about who passes it or anything like that. Nobody knows. Nobody is really paying attention except them. It's all gamesmanship, showmanship. It was ridiculous that it was pushed to this point. But I think the business people were starting to push the senators. They were getting in there saying, look, stop doing this. And so that's when McConnell went in and did it. And probably in the end, when it comes up again, it'll probably happen again. But but the problem is because of the filibuster has just gotten to be such a ridiculous thing that not filibustering is now considered to be a vote in support, right? I mean, it's so ridiculous to that. It should be that, look, you don't have to vote for the thing, just get out of the way, right? I mean, that's what it should be. But to not filibuster is considered supporting it. I mean, it's an absolute bizarre situation. And Manchin was saying, no, I don't want to carve out an exception to the filibuster for that. I mean, come on, he's the business Democrat, right? I mean, for crying out loud, it's absolutely bizarre. And of course, what McConnell wanted to do was somehow use it to be able to shut down the reconciliation spending bill that the Democrats were going to have, but they're not going to do that. That's their agenda. That is the Biden legacy, right? That's what they all want to run on going into next year. So they're absolutely not going to do that. So it's just, again, it's a game of chicken. Are they going to do it, and how close are they going to get? And as Janet Yellen pointed out, it's not even just getting it done before the deadline goes. You can hurt the credit rating just by letting it get so close.
Yeah, so there's a term, I haven't heard it used in a long time, but it's called spin doctors, right? The spin room and the people that are managing the message. And I think in this case, it's kind of gone amok. You've got people saying, you know, Biden floated the idea, well, we will need a filibuster carve out here because this is essential. Just look at all the stars that are in alignment, the banking system and the all the professional finance folks and existing Congress folks and voters out there at large. That the Congress has passed the laws, committed the spending. Like I always say, we already borrow 40 cents of every dollar. So to use the budget cap, to use the deficit cap as a reason to constrain new spending is really tying your hands behind your back for no good reason.
Right. And again, this debt ceiling isn't to deal with future spending. It's to deal with money we already spent, past credit card bills, what we already have allocated. So it's really bizarre.
Yeah. And one last thing I forgot to mention, I know I said this last week, 7 trillion of the 28 trillion is just from the Trump administration in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
So if it really came down to putting all the cards on the table, the tax cut would look juicy. It would look like a black eye, I think, so to speak, for fiscal sanity that the Republicans would like everybody to point to as their North Star. That was an extremely irresponsible tax cut in all things being equal.
All right, let's move on again to the bills because it's kind of related because the Republicans are kind of sitting back watching the Democrats. There's a lot of negotiating going on behind doors. Sinema's not saying much publicly. Apparently, she's saying something privately because Biden is refusing to repeat what she's saying. She says we're not going to negotiate it publicly. Manchin is saying things publicly, but not really being clear. At one point, he said, well, will you come off of 1.5 to go up as high as 2 or maybe even 2.3 trillion. I keep saying billion, but trillion. And he says anything's on the table, right? And then the next time he says, no, my number is really 1.5 trillion. But Payne, Paul, and Sanders have said there's no way we're going to come that low. So what's going on behind scenes, we don't know. Manchin is facing protests. Of course, he actually was kind of cool. He came out and talked to the kayakers. He's got a folksy kind of personality. I mean, I saw a video of him actually at Joan Baez's concert at the Kennedy Center singing "We Shall Overcome." I mean, it's just an interesting guy. But Sinema, on the other hand, faced a kind of intense protest where they followed her into a bathroom, and it's and which is really inappropriate. I mean, I think they should at least wait outside for her, but and she was complaining about it. That's not legitimate protest. And then President Biden was asked about it, and he said, yeah, it's not appropriate, but it's it's part of the process, right? I mean, yeah. It's what happens. It's the type of thing that happens. So anyway, a lot going on. I'm not quite sure where they're going, but nobody seems to be in a panic. So it seems like something's happening. There's a lot of usual Reddit going on. There's some back and forth between Sanders and Manchin this afternoon, but it doesn't seem like everybody's panicked that it's not going anywhere. It looks like they probably will settle on some kind of number. Manchin does seem to be actually moving on pulling back some of the tax breaks. Dave?
Yeah. So I saw a rough estimate. I was going to try to look it up in the videos really quickly, but I saw a rough estimate of which policies would make it under this new lower number and which policies wouldn't. And I think that's some of the horse trading that's going on right now is like, for example, which social programs seem like they're not going to be fully funded for the duration of the bill's 10-year window. So what it looks like they're going to do is they're trying to negotiate, well, maybe we'll only fully fund more of these programs for a shorter period of time, right, hoping to revisit them down the road. And that's where they're at right now in terms of like, look, you've talked about this for a while. I think that if you lower it by 30%, you take $1 trillion off. That's a nice round number. That's probably why Manchin's starting much lower than that. Instead of $2.5 trillion, he's starting down at $1.5 trillion. And Biden just is hungry for a win, looking for $2 trillion. And when the real policies are affecting real lives, we ought to be talking about the policies, which are priorities, which are going to advance the human condition here in the United States. So I think that's what's happening now over the coming weeks, couple month window while they try to dial this in.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I do think that it's going to it is going to happen. It doesn't look like my prediction last week is not going to come true. I'm glad, because it looked like it was just going to be hopeless. I thought Sinema was just in there to kill it. It does look like she does feel like, she may want to try to get reelected in 2024 and hope that people don't remember her on this. Her style is off, though. I mean, you got to talk to voters. You got to talk to people, right? You got to hold press conferences. You just have to do that. And she just doesn't want to do that. She does, and so who knows where she's at, but it's really down to those two senators. And, because the progressives, I think, have played it really well, saying this isn't our agenda. This is Biden's agenda. This is what he ran on.
Yeah, one last quote. I heard somebody say, I don't understand the calculus. It's not like we're asking her to do the Bernie Sanders or the Elizabeth Warren agenda. It's the Biden agenda. So you're right on with that last observation.
Okay, the January 6th commission, it's heating up. They are sending out subpoenas like crazy. Trump is starting to get agitated. He's wanting people to fight it. He's a number. It is going up to the organizers of the event. I think that they are the people who are being I don't want to say interrogated, but questioned behind closed doors today. And as the convictions are coming in and people are being sentenced to jail time, some of them longer than others, and possibly they're going to be asked to come in and testify. But the commission is very serious about these subpoenas. They have put together what some reporters have called an arsenal. And they've got attorneys lined up to fight these battles for the subpoenas. They don't want it to be a repeat of the Mueller thing. They are ready to go and push these things if they're being resisted. What can you tell us about what the commission, because actually there are a few Republicans in it, are going to be requesting?
So the committee chair, Benny Thompson, he's basically preparing for what is, for all, everybody, all observers think this is going to be a long drawn out legal battle. And I thought it was important just to remind people of the what. And so the purpose of the committee is that they want to investigate and map out the actions which led to the violence resulting in 5 dead people, 140 injured. They're looking at the connections between the event, which was Stop the Steal, and the speeches by Trump and Giuliani, and the violent acts. So they've already, prior to this week, several months ago, they subpoenaed 30 records from 35 telecommunications companies.
Right.
So they have the metadata. They know who talked to who and when, in theory. And now they're basically saying, now you've got to come out, everybody. They're asking everybody to come in and fill in the gaps. So the subpoenas, like what, the first piece, who's talking now, is the Stop the Steal rally organizers. So these are, they wanted to have all communications related to the organizing, the people. We could go down the list of names. It's not something I'll do right away, but we can go down the list of names. These people have a week to turn over the material, all material related to planning the event and the communications with the president and the president's staffers. And so that those select people, plus the people whose names are on the permits, plus the person who was the known point person, Trump's former campaign spokesperson. Her name's Katrina Pearson. She was the one who was the pivot point between that organization, Stop the Steal, and the White House and staff. So that's the first group of subpoenas. That's in who's there now. The other ones, the ones that are getting the big headlines, those are Trump's closest advisors, 4 people. So White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, because of his central role the whole time alongside President Trump when the Capitol was being stormed, he was standing there running point. So he's like the key witness. senior counselor Steve Bannon, who met with Trump officials at the Willard Hotel the night of January 5th. And people flew in from all over the country, like the network of people that showed up at that hotel room that night. It's all public knowledge. It's out there. I'm not going to slander anybody, but like that's a key thing to know about. Thirdly, communications director Dan Scavino, he strategized how to persuade Congress not to certify the elections. So he's the intermediary between Congress and the president. And finally, Pentagon Chief of Staff Kashif Patel. He's obviously Pentagon Chief of Staff. So he was nominated, I believe, for a much even higher role than that, although that's a pretty big role. So that's the core of what's happening. Just before I hand over to you, Trump is obviously going to challenge those last four people having any participation, any cooperation on grounds of executive privilege. He's instructed them not to turn over anything, not to cooperate at all, except for like minor things, just as a token gesture to show that it's not a complete stonewall. And, as we've talked about in the past, the idea is that they're going to extend the legal challenge. The strategy is to extend the legal challenge all the way through the election, hoping the Republicans take control and disband the committee.
Dan Scavino, by the way, is on the run. They can't find him.
Oh, wow.
He's hiding. I mean, because they want to do the legal challenge, but I don't think that you can extend a legal challenge to a subpoena out a year and a half. That doesn't work. I mean, you can extend it a few months, maybe into January, but then that becomes a story. I mean, that alone becomes a story. What are you trying to hide? I mean, that's that you're so desperate. That's the thing. This is why, again, I've said this over and over again. Republicans made a huge mistake not being in there, because they could have said, "What do you need these for?" They could have blocked it right there in the committee. But I think Trump was upset that it just would have given legitimacy to the whole thing. And if it looked like they were trying to block everything, that would have been a bad thing. And it's just, so they were in a tough space, but I think that Trump just wanted to shut it, all down and just have it not be legitimate or look legitimate. But what's going to happen again now is, these subpoenas are going to come back, and we're having behind the door interviews now, testimony now, but by the time we start getting into the election season, it's all going to be live, and they're going to pick the most interesting stuff, the stuff that is going to be television worthy for that. They'll probably get some of the people coming out of prison in jumpsuits to talk. Well, what was it that you thought that Trump wanted you to do? And the rest, and then that's when they're going to get Jim Jordan and people like that to talk about what they said. McCarthy, they don't want to get up there and talk about. They're talking about, well, can't I just give you a declaration or something like that? No, they want him to get on there and talk about exactly what was said to him. And they have to be careful, because apparently at least McCarthy was overheard by other people. So He doesn't want to perjure himself.
So my thought is that based on some information in the Guardian article about this that came out, former deputy White House counsel Patrick Philbin is the Trump's point person on this now. And he's actually, I don't think he's on the record as saying this, but people have attributed to him saying that he knows that that the obstruction, the executive privilege claims are not going to win over judges in any way significantly. And he's aware of this, that the courts aren't going to find in favor of Trump and disallow these documents on grounds of executive privilege. And the main legal argument here is because this is not Trump as president. This is Trump in a personal capacity. So the idea is that he doesn't have executive privilege when he schemes to, coerce, or not coerce, but manipulate a situation to overturn an election. He's not acting as the president. He's acting as Donald Trump, the person. So in effect, it's going to get thrown out of court. Its question is when. And I think your impulse is right. And let's just say it works itself all the way to the Supreme Court. And maybe there's 2 or 3 or 4 different questions. They're able to spread it out for all 4 people, instead of just one. Eventually, it's going to come back around. And so here the question is, well, what's the hammer? What's the coercion factor coming from the committee? And so with respect to these constitutional challenges, and they're already starting to signal they're going to call on the Justice Department to find these people in contempt and put them in jail. and people don't like to go to jail. So even if you don't turn over the documents, you go to jail, and then you worry, and then you wait it out in court to see if you actually had to turn them over or not. Who knows if that's how it's going to go? But that's the cat and mouse game that's starting to unfold this week.
Congress must act. We cannot leave here to go home to our families.
We will not leave this town until we have voted, up or down, until we have voted on direct relief for working people.
Mr. President, you're very aware, because in the committee that we both sit on, we've worked through a process of trying to form an answer to a problem that is coming at us again in 2 weeks. 2 weeks from now, we will hit the end of the fiscal year, which means the countdown clock will begin again towards when we're headed to another government shutdown.
All right, this brings us to topic, which is, sort of local state nature, but has a national significance. Everybody's paying attention to it, and that is the Virginia governor's race. And it is between Democrat Terry McAuliffe, famous, he was, part of the Clinton crowd, and Republican Glenn Youngkin, not the most right wing of Republicans, but kind of deferring, has to play it real careful with Trump. And Virginia, of course, has been a battleground state, is kind of has leaned Democrat in recent years, but it's not, it's not entirely, it's not exactly New York or California. It's it can go either way, and the polls have had him close. McAuliffe has been ahead in all of the polls, but a lot of them have been within the margin of error. I think 538 has them within 2 or 3 points, going on. Early voting has started there, and early voting, tends to benefit Democrats in general. We'll see what happens, but the debates have been kind of intense. McAuliffe is really hitting Youngkin on hard, because Youngkin is pushing for audits, like the Maricopa audit and the rest, playing into the stop the steal, but he's not really saying that. He won't say whether or not the election was stolen. McAuliffe is really hitting hard, which is it? Well, we just want to know whether our elections, blah, blah, blah. And McAuliffe is really hitting hard on that. And he's also apparently Youngkin said something bad about Taylor Swift or some dumb stuff like that, and the rest. And of course, Youngkin is really trying to play on Biden's failures in Afghanistan, and all kinds of stuff, to say this is, the incompetence you're working with, and no, I'm not Donald Trump, I'm my own man, and anyway, so it's an interesting campaign. Fox News today has McAuliffe up by 4 points. But Emerson, kind of more liberal, has them only up by 1 point. So kind of an interesting twist. I think McAuliffe has yet to be behind in any poll, and that's kind of significant. But it's been a nail biter the whole time.
The big, the big picture issue is that Biden is now, his popularity is at its lowest point of his presidency, primarily because of Afghanistan, pull out, the pushback or the critique of how it was done imperfectly. And so there's just a wave of discontent, and Virginia is not immune from that. So that, I think, has closened. It was like 49-45 in favor of McAuliffe for a while, which is, pretty balanced and very close, almost within the margin of error. But since the last, just recently, since Afghanistan withdrawal and the whole tenor of approval for the president has changed, that's made this closer. But if you look at one of those little video pressers that Nate Silver at 538 put out, I think it's like 2 minutes long. He's just like, is it even possible for a Democrat to lose this race? And he's like saying, yeah, actually an upset is possible. And the reasoning he gave was because in his, he looked at past elections in the state where a 3% gap between two gubernatorial candidates from a probability perspective, it was still a 30% probability of an upset. And so that's not small. And that's you wouldn't want it to be a coin toss. Certainly, this is just one step removed from that. And this has actually happened in the past. And when it was this close, the Democrat ended up winning by 9%. So it's similar to the Governor Gavin Newsom recall, where the polling got close, but the outcome was not all that close. And then also two other factors. One, President Biden had a 10% advantage in 2020 in the presidential election. So there is just a natural, balance in favor of Democrats at the statewide level. And also they have two Democratic senators. So there's a, if you put your finger to the wind, it's Terry McAuliffe's to lose, even with even money polling in the 11th hour.
The problem Democrats have, though, is they have a hard time getting people out to non-presidential elections in general. That's always a weak point for them. They used to have a hard time getting them out to midterm elections. They came out in 2018. And of course they came out in huge numbers this last election, the recall election. But again, in California, everybody gets mailed a ballot. I think that will forever alter the turnout in California as long as we have it. Now, not everybody isn't being mailed a ballot in Virginia, but early voting is easier in Virginia. A lot easier there than in Georgia or Texas. So that is a factor, and that allows for Democrat get out the votes to really be effective. So that is in their favor, and they are probably working really hard right now to get people out there on the phones, knocking on doors, and doing that. So it's so we'll see, and and that's where I think that where the Democrats will probably win it, but it's a difficult one. But where I would think that he has the edge is they don't really have an issue against McAuliffe. Right. There's no real issue against him. Yes, Biden's popularity is low. If Biden was doing better, it would probably be better for McAuliffe, but they don't really have an issue against McAuliffe. The Republican isn't a mad dog. They put up a pretty decent person. He's not Larry Elder. Right, yeah. So it's so that that's good for them, and he's done well in the debates. The debates have been pretty interesting. I've watched some clips from him. I mean, he holds his own. So we'll see. But it's it's close enough that it can happen. When you're in the margin of error, things can happen. Well, the polls could be missing something, just like they were missing. But again, the Trump voters, are they going to be there for this guy? I don't know.
Yeah. So two last things. I think one is we talked about the general tone, the impact of presidential popularity on polling. Another piece of this is, like you said, this Stop the Steal has morphed for the most part in respectable Republican circles into a voter integrity push. States around the country are looking to put in place voter reforms, air quotes, because they're concerned about participation. We'll give them the best possible framing of the issue on their behalf. And so, but how animated are people going to be in Virginia about that, about fraud? It's not really an overwhelming force, that these elections are fraudulent. These elections are getting stolen. That whole dialogue, that whole frame of reference doesn't seem to be part of this election there. Yeah. And then more, the second big issue, or that I think is worth mentioning here, is that Terry McAuliffe, he was the chair of the Democratic National Party at one point, so he's got deep connections. And Northern Virginia, the easternmost section there of northeastern Virginia, that's one of the most affluent areas in the country because of the connection to DC. So it's the consummate insider community that has grown to the west, towards the west. So this Democratic leaning, even if it's a 51-49, whatever the lean is, the lean that exists is deep. Deeply funded in organizing circles, in the what's the word, the important people. The important people really support his candidacy. So I think what you said about getting the vote out, Maybe they should be. Maybe we just don't hear about it from here. But I suspect that they're doing everything they can, just like Governor Newsom did here, to really mobilize the base.
Yeah, and like I said, I think Youngkin isn't really thinking he's going to energize too many Republicans. I think he just knows he can't win unless at least some of those Trump voters turn out. So he's got to not, he's got to pander to them to some degree. He just has to. He can't. So he's got to call for it and then hope that it doesn't hurt him with moderates, centrists. And we'll see how that plays out for him.
Yeah, and I don't know how close we are, but just again, one last thought is like the pandemic response from the White House that's a really key like lightning rod issue that Republicans seem to really be rallying around, the liberty aspect and the all the Washington elite people trying to tell us what to do thing. There is energy there, so that's what I think is keeping it so close.
After 20 years, $1 trillion spent training and equipping hundreds of thousands of Afghan national security and defense forces, 2,448 Americans killed, and untold thousands coming home with unseen trauma to their mental health.
I go to bed at night thinking about the families that have lost loved ones over there, and in addition, the Americans we left, the allies we abandoned.
U.S. service members in Kabul did heroic work, securing the airport, protecting civilians of many nationalities, including tens of thousands of Afghans, and airlifting them out. We've seen pictures of U.S. service members at the Kabul airport cradling babies, comforting families.
We now have Americans stuck in Afghanistan, the Taliban in charge, with more weaponry than they've ever had in the past.
Okay, we're going to spend a little bit of time on this. We are in now the season of redistricting. Every 10 years this comes up. We've had our census, our census that comes out every 10 years. And we now know how many districts, congressional districts, every state gets allocated, and this is going to have a big bearing on who which party retains the majority of in each, well, in the House of Congress next year. And I feel almost guilty because I'm making use of Nate Silver's materials here. We're going to show them to you in a little bit, but I totally disagree with Nate Silver's analysis. He's been saying, yeah, there's going to be a big difference because the Republicans have control of so many states in terms of the redistricting that they're going to be able to gerrymander a lot more seats. And as I've said on this show, that I think that they've maxed out on their gerrymandering. We've already seen that in what looks to have been pretty close to the final product in Texas. They may actually even lose a seat or two in Texas by the time they're done. They're gaining a seat or two here, losing a seat or two here. And so we've got 3 more final seats. And if we have time, we're going to take 20 minutes on this topic. We might look at some of the proposed seats coming in. I just wanted to discuss the process of it. And it's very interesting because, again, a lot of the states that are coming in are states where they were all Republicans. Arkansas, for instance, they were all Republicans. They're still going to be Republicans. Some maps that were proposed might have made one semi-competitive, and Republicans are shutting that down right away. No competitive. It's going to be 4 solidly red districts. So it'll stay Republican, but they were Republican in 2019. So the fact that they're going to be Republican next year is not going to help them retake Congress, right? So I wanted the 3 states that just this over the past week have turned in their final maps and have been approved by the legislature. We'll start. The farthest west is Nebraska, if you're watching on television, you can see the new map, but I'll describe the new map and compare it to the old map. Now, it looks like a huge difference. As we all know, Nebraska and Maine, but both of them we're going to discuss today. Nebraska and Maine are the only two states which allow for electoral college votes in the presidential race to be allocated according to the congressional districts. In other words, if you win a congressional district, you get to have that that presidential candidate gets to have that electoral college point, even if they lose all the rest. If they can manage to win two of them, it's split 2 and 2. But what happened this past 2020 was as Obama had won, Biden won the district around Omaha, which is a competitive district, and sometimes Democrats win the congressional race there. Likewise, Trump won the 2nd district of Maine, which we will also be discussing. So this was the first time that the states that could split them, both of them split. And it's kind of interesting. So if you look at Nebraska, the Republicans have long wanted to kill this. When Obama took the Omaha district in 2008, a bunch of Republicans were really angry, and they wanted to kill it. They wanted to make it a winner-take-all state. But there was a lot of pushback on that because there are people who were conservative in a different way. They liked the tradition of Nebraska being that way, right? They wanted to. It's part of their history that they allocate that every congressional district gets their own electoral college point. They were raised about it. There's a philosophy around it, so it didn't go anywhere. So this time they were trying to gerrymander for it, but they've got a even though the Republicans control the legislature there was some room for Democrats to kind of like the Republicans did in Oregon to block a completely biased map. They wanted to somehow split up the Omaha district and make it so that it wasn't going to happen. That didn't happen, but they did manage to change it a little bit. And if you look at the old map, you'll see that it's kind of small around Omaha, focused around Omaha. The new map, it looks like a big difference, but it's really not a big difference. It's twice the size in geography. But what it does is it takes a little bit of the suburbs out of Omaha and extends further into a more conservative county. It really just leads to a few hundred more Republicans. It's still a very competitive district, and maybe the Republican running there will get a few hundred more votes, but not anything that's likely to be considered a serious advantage. So that one remains competitive. No gains for Republicans there.
So Eric, I just want to ask you, because you've been explaining it so clearly. This is a master class in understanding Nebraska. The 3 districts, one focuses on the city of Omaha. It used to be very tightly packed around Omaha, but when it came time to expand it during redistricting, they included some Republican suburbs to water it down and make it a little less likely that Democrats could win than in the past. Just big picture, any other observations beyond like that district? They say right now is an R+3, which is really close.
Yeah.
So beyond this close district staying close, it doesn't look like the Republicans really got much of an advantage out of this redistricting control.
No, they didn't, because there were a bunch of maps proposed, and if it was kind of like Oregon, the Democrats were actually threatening to walk out, and if they did, it would have gone to the independent commission. It was almost identical to what happened with Oregon, and they did not want that because that could have led to it going back to the others. So they got this one in, and it gives the Republicans a little bit more. Incidentally, that big one to the left there, the west, that takes up most of the state, that's the most conservative district in the country. That's just a little trivia there in terms of Republicans. So
plus 57. Ouch! Yeah. I didn't even know there was a number that big.
Yep. So anyway, that's Nebraska. That's the cornfield. So that's we had Nebraska is resolved. Let's move a little bit east and take a look at Indiana. Has got theirs in. Now, as you can see, there are a total of 9 districts. No change in the number. Indiana still had 9, and they have 9 again. There's a real interesting discussion. It's one of the more conservative states in the union. how did Obama win it in 2008? There's a big discussion about that. And they say, well, he did class politics really well, right? He got a lot of votes in the South, Madison County and the rest by doing it well, but he didn't do well in West Virginia. That's white working class, right? What was it? I mean, Democrats have been trying to unlock that mystery for a long time. There's a lot of discussion around it. But, you know, and you got in the history of Indiana, I mean, Eugene Debs is from Terre Haute. You know, there's a history of socialist activism there. You know, but right now it's very conservative. And so the Republicans, of course, you know, in 2019 had 7 strong districts and it was 7 Republicans. And the Democrats had 2, and they're going to come out of it with 7 Democrats and, 7 Republicans and 2 Democrats. Indianapolis, of course, very blue city, has grown by about 60,000 people, not enough to cause a lot of problems for the Republicans redistricting, not like Atlanta in Georgia or Austin in Texas or Arizona Phoenix in Arizona. Not even like Salt Lake City in Utah. It's, you know, they can still contain it. And Gary, of course, which is basically a suburb of Chicago, tends to be blue, though it's not all that liberal. It's where a lot of conservatives live because they don't want to be in Chicago, right? So it's light blue, but still pretty solid Democrat, right? Well, I want you to take a look at the old map, and for those of you who can't see. If you look to the north on the old map, you'll see that there's a lighter shade of red there. That is the 5th district of Illinois and Indiana, and you'll notice that the blue district there goes south of Indianapolis to the suburb south, and Indianapolis is directly in the middle of the blue district. Why, going back to the new map, why did they move it up so that almost all the district is north of Indianapolis? Because the Republicans did not want that district, Indiana's 5th, to be competitive. And it was becoming more competitive as people were moving into Indianapolis. So they moved that up to take away some of those suburbs. Victoria Sparks defeated Charlotte Hale in 2020 by 50 to 45%. Comfortable enough, but still too close to comfort. And more people are probably going to be moving into Indianapolis. It is kind of an up and coming city. So they defensively moved the Indianapolis district up to incorporate some of those. It causes, if you go back to the new map, a little bit of a problem. Indiana's 6th goes from like 44 or 43% to like 37%. Not a big problem, but you know they may in the future have to worry about the southern suburbs. But for now, it makes everything safe. And so they gerrymandered to protect themselves. But no gains, right? That's
that's kind of you hit the nail on the head. They consolidated power in the sprawling region to the north of Indianapolis. They made it so that Indianapolis is solid blue, solid Democrat. That's a plus 37 district, and the other is now a plus. They've surrounded that. The Democratic one Democratic district in the middle of the state with a bunch of plus 37s and 36s around it, containing the city in effect. And then to a lesser extent, they didn't do much else really. They turned one leaning Republican district to a strong one. Like you said, they defended 1 out of 9 of their seats basically.
Yes. Yeah. You know, and it's Indiana. I mean, they didn't have to do much. I think they just didn't want to take a chance. That 5% difference was too close to call, too close for them, and they didn't want to take any chances because Indianapolis is probably going to grow over the next 10 years, and it's not going to be bringing in Republicans. So, at least in the same numbers. So. Indiana is done on the books. I want to take a look at Maine now. Their final one is in. Now, they've only got 2 districts, right? And as we discussed, the 2nd district, which is the large one to the north, went to Trump. And it is lean Republican. Should be, right? Except that you have this Democrat. His name is Jared Golden, and he actually defeated the Republican incumbent there, forgetting his name, Laughlin or something like that, in 2018. And unlike a lot of, and it came in with that blue wave, and unlike a lot of the kind of moderate Democrats who lost their positions in 2020, he held on. I believe it was about a 5% margin, not a runaway win, but also not a squeaker either. He seems to have a good formula. He is somebody who is who is like strong on with conservatives and gun rights and things like that. But and it probably isn't really gung ho about the reconciliation bill and all of that, but manages to stay moderate without pissing people off in the Democratic Party like Manchin and Sinema. He seems to be keeping a low profile. His name isn't coming up like Glockner and all these other people, right? Glockheimer. He seems to keep a low profile, so the Democrats in his district are okay with him. He seems to be making the right votes. Seems to have a formula that's working out for him. The Democrats wanted to give him a little bit more help by moving more Democrats from the District 1. He's got a pretty, they've got a pretty good lean down there, plus 16. Not a huge one, not one that they want to be too cocky about. And they proposed trying to move like 6,000 up there. I think they ended up with less than that because there is a quasi-independent process there, and I don't think they got the full one. I think they managed to move like less than 1,000 Democrats up into the district. But so anyway, but if you look at the old map, you can and compare it with the new, you can see that it's just that little northern part. I think around the Capitol it is just got moved a little bit, not too much of a difference there, but you can take a look at it. You can see all of these maps, by the way, on 538. If you go to 538, they on the right hand column, they've got new maps are coming in every day, and they've got a lot of the proposed maps. But you want to say anything about Maine?
Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting is that both parties proposed a map, and it ended up going to a commission, I guess. I think that's the name of the body,
right.
The State's Apportionment Commission, because both parties were like, well, this is what we want, and that's what we want, but they weren't able to get supermajorities, so they went to the commission, and then the supermajorities passed. But it turns out it's relatively status quo, other than moving the capital into that first district, the Democratic-leaning Southern District. So they, to a certain extent, they that like you said, that district is a D plus 16, which is pretty solid, and so. The only, I think, beyond the fact that it went to a neutral body, I think it's also kind of interesting that like you said, that there's a Democrat who won a plus 10 Republican district, which is the entirety of the northern state, part of the state, the vast majority of the state geographically. That's a hyper competitive seat, and also, you said it earlier when we talked about Nebraska. This is one of those states where the congressional districts each get their own elector in the Electoral College.
Yes.
So, I mean, just based on what we see, it's pretty likely that they'll actually split 1-1. I mean, not that 2024 is a long way away. We have no idea who the candidates are, but just based on kind of the lay of the land, it's a stalemate, status quo kind of equilibrium that it looks like was maintained in this map process.
And bear in mind, Jared Golden won by 5 percentage points in the same space that Trump won. So, so that's pretty good indication that he, even with this advantage, he may not lose. even
Yeah.
in 2022. So anyway, we only have a few minutes left in this. I want to invite people when they go look at the map. It's an interactive map, and there are a bunch of states that have these yellow lines on them, and those are maps where they have proposed maps that you can go look at. And I just want to make a couple of comments. Ohio, the Democrats have put up their wish map. It's not going to happen. It basically splits Columbus. Columbus has been growing. It's going to be one of those problems for the Republicans, and it gives them 2 districts out of that. Destroys Jim Jordan's Duck District. That's not going to happen. Splits up the snake of the lake up in the north into 2 competitive districts, and basically adds several for the Democrats, and doesn't break up Cincinnati down in the southwest. Obviously, that's not going to happen. The Republicans are going to gerrymander that one. But like I said, they're tapped out, and they got to deal with the fact that Columbus has expanded. And the more you take from one, the more you put another Republican district at risk. Taking chances, right? So you got to do what they did in Utah, and send tendrils in so that you're not putting anybody at risk, and it just looks absolutely ridiculous. But you've got Michigan coming up, Georgia. It seems like the Republicans down there may have found a way to gain a seat, even with Atlanta expanding. But again, there's some competitive seats in order to do that. And we'll talk about that when that is finalized. Texas not yet finalized, by the way, and there may be court challenges to that one. So a lot happening. I want to mention to people too that California, we're a long ways from having ours. They're still taking in public input, and there is a site in which you can actually propose your own maps. You can draw your own maps on it. I haven't figured out how to do it. I'll try to come back after I do the tutorial next week and see if I can explain how to do it. You can also create your own quote unquote communities of interest, where you talk about it, and then they want you to send it as input to create metadata from which the commission, we have a totally independent commission that is going to decide on the new districts based upon that information. So we're putting the website up now, and so please visit it. And if you want to talk and give me input on this and any questions about this, Redwood Wonk at gmail.com. And got a lot more to say on this. So the fall is going to be all about the congressional redistricting, but we got to move on. All right, Dave, what do you got for predictions?
Well, as we speak, I saw a headline go by that says Senate nears agreement to stave off debt crisis until December. So I guess they're actually in the room now doing the voting and trying to get it through. Both sides declare victory when this happens. Both sides say the other side's losers. So this theater as it plays out, I know most people look away out of self-interest and just it's not the interesting train wreck that it is to me and you. But so my prediction is that we will see that the Republicans are able to force into a budget reconciliation. The changing of the filibuster is probably going to be a red line. Carving out a filibuster exemption is probably a red line for Manchin and Sinema. Therefore, that power isn't really there as far as I see it. I don't think they can railroad through a limitless spending spree, which means they have to put some kind of limit on it when they put it in place. And I say just aim high. If you do need to set real numbers there, just say, look, we're going to max it out. And if we pass this 1.5 trillion this and this 3 trillion that, we need to raise it by 5 trillion plus the other X trillion we're going to already borrow, which is probably another 2 trillion times X number of years, make it 50 trillion. Just change it and end it.
All right. I'm going to reverse my last week's. I was kind of depressed about it last week, but I thought that the bills were going down in flames. I thought Sinema was just out to kill the whole thing and figuring she was going to probably even resign from Congress. It just seemed like absolute cynicism. I think actually it's going to happen. There's a lot of talks going on, and Biden has been throwing out numbers like 2.3 trillion. Whereas Manchin had said 1.5 trillion and then said, well, anything's possible, but then backtracked, said, no, I really want 1.5. I think that means 2.3 might be too high for him. So I'm thinking it's either it would be 1.9, 2 trillion at the highest, but probably more like 1.9. So what are the Democrats going to do about this? I think rather than cutting out programs, I think they're going to scale them back to 5 years, figuring that the ones that are more popular might get renewed. We have to remember what happened with Obamacare. The Republicans passed like 60 resolutions to kill it. And then when finally they had the power to kill it, they stopped, right? Once things are vested, there's power behind them. So I think what they have to do is just really believe that at least some of these programs, some of these campaigns will have enough power that people are saying, yes, we want more. And that even if Democrats don't have the majority in all of the houses, that there will be political will to continue them in 5 years and maybe expand them. That's what I think is going to happen.
I think you're right. These programs are going to have natural constituencies because they meet real needs, and it'll be hard to take them away once you get them in place.
Okay, that's our show this week. We'll be discussing all of these things probably next week and new things. Any input, please email us at redwoodwonk@gmail.com. Until next week, keep thinking.